Welcome to another Build Insights video. Today we'll be taking a look at the build-out for the Theatre and Crypt of Balbus in Rome. This site is known as the Theatrum Crypta Balbi in Latin, and it's the third subsection of Phase 3 in my years-long effort to recreate all of the ancient city circa mid-4th century CE. This area was designed in two distinct sections and comes in at around 6,300 bricks, bringing the running total for the entire SPQR diorama to about 236,000 bricks. It also connects directly to the Portico of Octavia, which we explored in a previous video. Thank you to all my members on Patreon who are seeing these build insights several weeks earlier than my general audience. Patrons also get insights into the design process for my work, and the design insights for the Theatre and Crypta Balbus were shared all the way back in December 2024. If you'd like to become a member and get access to all this and much more, you'll find a link in the description. To start things off on this next section of the diorama, we're keeping it simple. Looking back, I don't think I've ever discussed the cobblestones of the Roman streets, which is odd considering they account for the most ubiquitous design feature of the entire diorama. For a civilization that earned the shorthand "all roads lead to Rome," I knew I needed a technique that suitably expressed these foundational elements of infrastructure, but also would be simple enough to blend into its surroundings. I usually opt for simple tiles and studs wherever structures are connected above, but for the exposed street surfaces, I stick with 4 unique tiles, specifically 1x1 squares, circles, semicircles, and quarter circle tiles. If you've ever tried to create a uniform surface using 1x1 tiles, you'll know that it's actually rather difficult to align them exactly, and I certainly took advantage of this since I prefer them to be improperly aligned and often rotated completely out of alignment. Overall, these small derivations are more accurate reflections of historical Roman paving stones, and go a long way toward enhancing the realism of the overall piece. The Theatre of Balbus was built on this site in the Campus Martius during the Augustan period in the late 1st century BCE. It was dedicated by a friend of Augustus, Lucius Cornelius Balbus, who was proconsul in Africa at the time, and whose name lived on in the theatre he built. Because of its proximity to the Tiber River, the Theatrum Balbi was often inundated with floodwaters, and funnily enough, Lucius Balbus had to attend the inauguration of his new theatre by boat, due to a particularly severe flood in 13 BCE. One modern estimate puts the capacity of the Theatre of Balbus right around 11,500. Though to be honest, we can't be sure of much since the site has barely been excavated, but you can visit it today as the Crypta Balbi is one of the many sites preserved by the Museo Nazionale Romano. As Roman theatres go, the Theatrum Balbi was actually rather small. If we look at the immediate area of the Campus Martius, it's dwarfed by 3 other theatrical venues, including the Theatre of Marcellus, which we saw back in Phase 1, and the enormous Theatre of Pompey, which we'll be seeing in the next subsection of Phase 3. But the Theatre of Balbus certainly wouldn't have been anything to scoff at in the Roman provinces. In fact, my primary reference for reconstructing the Scaenae Franz, or scenic backdrop of the stage, was the similarly sized but far better preserved Theatre of Orange in southern France. This precedent helped inform many of the blank pages in the archaeological and architectural record, but the choice of olive green for the 4 primary columns at the center of the stage referenced the 4 onyx columns we know once stood amidst the ensemble of the Scaenae Franz. I suppose this all goes to show that whatever information is lacking, I tend to design the subject matter based on better preserved precedents elsewhere, combined with small clues discovered on site. The Crypta Balbi is currently a museum housed within the buildings on top of the site's ruins. Excavations on the site began in 1981, but only after a few revealing fragments of the former urbis were pieced together in the 1960s. Very little ancient writing attests to the complex, other than its construction under Balbus and reconstructions under Domitian in the late 1st century, Hadrian in the 2nd, and an unattributed restoration in the 4th century. But by the 5th century, the theater had fallen into disuse and was gradually spoliated for building materials in the Middle Ages. Thankfully, we can still reliably reconstruct the theater and crypt as they likely appeared in the 4th century. The title of crypt, however, is misleading as it refers not to a Christianized space below the altar of a church, but the original Latin word for the space beneath a covered portico. Practically speaking, this covered walkway behind the semicircular theater would have provided a space in which to mingle before, between, and after performances. Directly behind the Theater of Balbus were a series of temples and other monuments which were part of the sacred Largo Argentina area. The temple of Juno Curitis is depicted here. Curitis was a pre-Roman Sabine goddess of motherhood and protection, but this deity was eventually superseded by Juno, whose aspect known as Juno Curitis came to be associated with protection and military strength. The Ides Vulcani, or Temple of Vulcan, is the larger of the two temples on the left, and is appropriately reconstructed with various shades of red bricks. On one side of the pair of temples was the Aedificum Jovis Fulgaris, an open-air altar and grove dedicated to Jupiter Fulgor, god of celestial phenomena. On the other side, there was the equestrian statue depicting Gaius Verus on horseback and dated to the late 1st century BCE. Ironically, we know this because the statue was vehemently maligned in the writings of Cicero. Like most Roman theaters and amphitheaters, there would have been a velarium covering the cavea of the Theater of Balbus. Velaria were retractable awnings made of sails and held aloft using timbers and riggings, much like the masts of a ship, which is why the Roman Navy maintained and operated the velaria throughout the city. I've recreated velaria back in Phase 1, but for Phase 3, I opted for laser cutting the shapes directly on a sheet of fabric, rather than printing out stencils and then cutting them by hand as I did previously. Shout out to the folks at Big Kid Bricks who provided the fabric and did the laser cutting based on my AutoCAD drawings. The individual segments of cloth taper inward toward the center of the theater and are strung along fishing pole elements which form the horizontal timbers of the velarium. Once set in place, the entire assembly is tied together with a continuous piece of hemp cord, providing an approximation of what the actual rigging may have looked like. Going back to the basics, one of the domus near the Theater of Balbus features an interior courtyard. This courtyard is defined by what we call a compluvium, which features a slanted roof allowing water to drain into a central basin known as the impluvium. It's one of my more esoteric techniques, which dates back to the interpretation of Herod's palace from my 2021 piece depicting 1st century Jerusalem. The inverted convex slopes aren't attached to anything, they're just held in place by their intrinsic geometry and the exterior panels. One of my favorite moments of each new neighborhood throughout ancient Rome are snapping the streets to the base. Most of these are either pitched or angled or both, and often attached via a single rocker plate or a round plate with underside handle. These streets also help cover odd gaps between the many overlapping angles of the city streets. The final bit of film-worthy additions to this portion of ancient Rome are the multiple domus and insulae which fill in the remaining gaps. I hope you enjoyed these insights into the theater and crypt of Balbus. If you want to see the whole thing together with the rest of the SPQR diorama, you can check out the renderings available on my Patreon. Aside from supporting my work, Patreon membership also gets you early access to all these insights videos. And if you'd like to see the diorama in person, you can catch the debut of Phase 3 later this year at an upcoming event in Rome. I'll be sure to share those details as soon as I can. In the meantime, thanks for following along, and I'll see you in the next one.